किसान की हमारे खेत में पाइपलाइन फूट चुकी है 1 एकड़ जंगल में पानी
Something unusual has been unfolding in Jerusalem during this Holy Week, something many have quietly begun to notice. Moments usually filled with large gatherings and familiar rhythms have felt different this time. Then weather patterns shifted, with storms forming quickly and showing stronger intensity than expected. Not long after, unfamiliar lights emerged overhead, appearing without source, holding formations that didn't behave like anything familiar. And quietly, even the ground showed small cracks where everything once seemed steady. Individually, each moment can be explained, but together, they feel harder to ignore. Al-Aqsa Mosque was reportedly restricted. Many were left standing outside during one of the most sacred moments of Ramadan. At first, it seemed like a temporary measure tied to rising tension. But within hours, the atmosphere began to shift. Instead of gathering inside, people quietly spread across the streets. Sidewalks, narrow roads, and open spaces slowly turned into places of prayer. No announcements, no organization. Just rows forming under the open sky. Some stood in silence. Others bowed, their movements steady, focused. Life around them slowed. Authorities pointed to security concerns, saying situations like this can happen when pressure builds across the region. And while that may explain the restriction, and it doesn't fully explain the image that followed. Because when doors close, people don't stop believing. They simply find another place to pray. For some watching, the moment carried a deeper weight. A quiet echo of Gospel of Luke 21, where distress among nations begins to affect everyday life. Not everyone sees it that way, but the shift is hard to ignore. From sacred ground to open streets. Was this just a temporary scene, or the beginning of something more? From prayers that once filled the streets with steady rhythm to a tension no one could quite explain, something else began to unfold. During what should have been one of the most crowded moments of the year in Jerusalem, the path from the Mount of Olives did not stand empty. But it did not feel the same. People still came. They gathered in smaller numbers, their voices quieter, and their steps slower. Because beneath their feet, something had changed. At first, it was just a line, thin, easy to overlook, running across the surface of the ancient stone road. Then another appeared, and another, hairline fractures stretching outward, branching across the path that many believe Jesus Christ once walked when entering the city, fulfilling the words of Book of Zechariah 9:9, not as a conqueror, but as a king of peace. In past years, thousands would move through this very place, lifting branches, echoing the words of Book of Psalms 118, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But this time, something interrupted that rhythm. People noticed where they stepped. Conversations shifted. Some paused mid-walk, looking down, not in fear exactly, but in something harder to define, a mix of unease and anticipation, as if the ground itself was not simply cracking, but responding. Witnesses described the fractures as unusual, though not impossible. Ground movement, natural stress, shifting layers beneath ancient foundations, these things have explanations. And yet, the timing and the place made it difficult to dismiss entirely, because this is not just any path. It is ground tied to prophecy. And for some, the sight of stone beginning to split brought back another passage, Book of Zechariah 14:4. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west. No one is saying that moment has come. Not yet. But the image is enough to stay with you. Because when cracks begin to appear in a place where history and prophecy meet, people don't just see stone shifting, and they start to wonder what might be building beneath it. So what does it mean? When the ground along this path no longer feels whole? Is this simply pressure beneath ancient layers finally releasing? Or the kind of moment people will look back on and realize it felt different for a reason? If you think back in history, there are so many places where you could think that. And just as the perplexity settled over the ancient paths, the sky above ancient stones seemed to answer in a way no one expected. One morning, the weather above the western wall and nearby areas began shifting quickly. What started as a normal sky soon changed. Clouds gathered faster than usual, thick and heavy, spreading across the horizon like a dark curtain. At first, it didn't seem unusual. Sudden weather changes can happen in this region. But, within minutes, the intensity grew. Rain began falling harder. Winds picked up. And then came something many did not expect. Hail. Not light, scattered pieces, but strong, rapid impacts striking rooftops, roads, and cars. The sound echoed through neighborhoods as people paused and looked up, trying to understand what was happening. Some described it as unusual for this time. Others pointed out that weather systems, air pressure shifts, temperature contrasts can create storms like this, even in places where they don't happen often. Scientifically, it can be explained, but the timing caught attention. Because these patterns didn't just appear randomly, they came during a period when everything already felt unsettled. And that made people look closer. For some observers, the imagery felt familiar. Moments where weather becomes intense, overwhelming, and almost symbolic, like descriptions found in the Book of Exodus, where nature itself responds in powerful ways. Of course, interpretations differ. But standing beneath that sky, one thought quietly remained. Was this simply another storm? Or part of a pattern people are only beginning to notice? And just as the storm seemed to subside and the sky began to settle, something far more unsettling began to take shape above. Faint, just a glow, barely distinct from the darkness. But within minutes, the shapes became clearer. These weren't scattered points like stars, and they didn't move like aircraft. And they held their positions, forming patterns. Strange, defined, almost geometric shapes made of light, hovering, shifting slightly, but never fully breaking apart. They didn't flicker. They didn't fade. They remained. Some witnesses described a moment just before the lights appeared. A pause, no wind, no distant traffic, no sound at all, just stillness, deep and complete. And then, without transition, the lights were there. What made this even more unsettling was what followed the next day. Across different parts of the region, people began reporting something they couldn't easily explain. Two suns visible in the sky at the same time. Not reflections in glass, not camera artifacts, but clearly visible to the naked eye. One brighter, one slightly dimmer, both suspended above the horizon. And it wasn't only Jerusalem. Similar reports began surfacing from the United States, from parts of China, and even from regions in Russia. Different locations, different time zones. Yet the same description kept repeating. Two suns, side by side. Experts were quick to respond, pointing to a known atmospheric phenomenon called a sundog, an optical effect caused by sunlight refracting through ice crystals in the atmosphere, often creating bright spots that can resemble additional suns. Under the right conditions, they explained, this is entirely natural. Documented? Understood. But even among experts, There were quiet acknowledgments. The clarity, the intensity, the timing across multiple regions. It wasn't something commonly seen at this scale. And once again, it wasn't happening in isolation. It came after the storm. It followed the appearance of those structured lights in the night sky. And it emerged during a time when global tension was already rising. For some, these images felt symbolic, echoing ancient passages that spoke of signs in the heavens, moments when the sky itself would no longer behave as expected. Others dismissed it, holding firmly to scientific explanation. But as those lights held their shape above the city, and as reports of two suns spread across continents, one question lingered, quiet but persistent. Was this simply a rare alignment of natural conditions? Or were we beginning to witness something we don't yet fully understand? And do you feel the same way we do? When strange things keep happening silently but undeniably? Are these just isolated events? Or are they a warning, something God is sending us to pay attention to? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As the sky darkened and the movements above faded, attention began to shift downwards, to something less visible but no less disturbing. In some areas of Jerusalem, even the ground itself showed subtle changes. At first, they were almost imperceptible. Thin, silent cracks stretched across the cobblestone streets, and gaps appeared where everything had previously been solid and unshaken. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. Just small lines, easily overlooked. But then, larger cracks appeared. Some areas began to sink slightly, not to the point of causing panic, but enough for those who walked there daily to notice. The ground no longer felt the same. Surfaces that were once solid now seemed to shift, ever so slightly, under each step. And what made it even more worrying was that it happened so silently. No sound, no warning, just the change. Experts often point to natural explanations. In areas like this, the limestone beneath the surface can gradually erode over time. Groundwater moves through the hidden layers, creating voids that gradually weaken the soil above. Scientifically, this is well understood. But again, it's not just the explanation that matters. The problem lies in the timing of its occurrence. It happened after a series of strange events. For some, this is reminiscent of passages in the book of Zechariah, where the very land is described as undergoing transformation at times of deeper significance. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. But standing there, feeling the ground no longer as firm as before, a question quietly arises. Are these merely natural changes over time? Or is something else unfolding right before our eyes? And just when it seemed the ground had revealed all it would, something else began to draw attention, quietly, almost hidden in plain sight. In several areas around Jerusalem, water began behaving in ways people didn't expect. At first, it was easy to overlook. Small puddles left behind after the rain, thin streams running along stone paths, nothing unusual. But then, subtle changes appeared. Some noticed faint ripples forming on still water, even when there was no wind. Others described tiny bubbles rising slowly to the surface, not rapidly, not violently, just steady, quiet, and persistent. Reflections in the water seemed to shift in ways that didn't quite match the light above, bending and moving as if something beneath was influencing them. Individually, each detail seemed minor, but together, they began to stand out. Experts suggest that light interacting with uneven surfaces can create visual distortions. Underground movement, air pockets, water flow beneath layers of stone can also affect how water behaves above. Scientifically, these explanations exist, but once again, it wasn't only what people saw. It was when they saw it, because this followed everything else: the sky, the storm, the silence, the ground itself. And now, even the water seemed different. The changes weren't dramatic. They didn't demand attention. But for those who noticed, they were difficult to forget. Some observers quietly connected these moments to imagery found in the book of Exodus, where water is described not just as an element, but as part of something greater. Others see only natural causes. But watching those subtle movements on the surface, one question remained. When even the smallest details begin to shift, is it still just a coincidence? And just when the water seemed to settle, people began to look up again, and what they saw felt different. Over Jerusalem, the sky slowly shifted in color. At first, it resembled a normal sunset, soft tones of orange spreading across the horizon. But within minutes, the Otenki deepened. Orange turned to a darker red. Red spread wider, heavier, filling more of the sky than expected. It didn't fade the way it usually does. It lingered. The intensity felt stronger than a typical evening light. The air itself seemed thicker, as if the sky was not just changing color, but pressing down over the city. Some who stood watching described it as dim, almost muted, as though the light had lost its clarity. Scientifically, there are explanations. Dust in the atmosphere, particles from distant sources, or changes in air conditions can alter how light scatters, shifting colors toward deeper reds and oranges. Similar scenes have been recorded in other parts of the world under certain conditions. But again, it wasn't only the color, it was the feeling. Because this came after everything else. After the movement in the sky, after the storm, after the silence, after the ground, and even the water. And now, the sky itself seemed to change. For some, the image brought to mind words from the Gospel of Luke 21, where signs in the heavens are mentioned in moments of uncertainty. Others see it simply as a natural interaction between light and air. But standing beneath that deep red sky, one quiet thought remained. When even the heavens begin to look different, is it still just another sunset? Across these moments, sky, ground, water, and air, what stands out is not any single event, but how they seem to unfold together, quietly shaping the atmosphere around everyday life. In Jerusalem, people first noticed changes above them. The sky shifted in color, deeper and heavier than usual. Then came the movement, birds gathering in unusual patterns, silence settling before motion returned. Soon after, the ground itself showed subtle signs of change, small cracks forming where stability was once taken for granted. And even the water, something so familiar, began to behave in ways that felt slightly different. Ripples without wind, reflections that didn't fully align. Individually, each of these moments can be explained. Science offers clear pathways, atmospheric conditions, geological processes, environmental shifts, and those explanations matter. They help us understand how the world works. But when these changes appear close together, in sequence, they begin to feel less isolated and more connected to how people experience the world around them. Not as fear, but as awareness. Because for many, these moments don't interrupt daily life. They enter into it. People still walk the same streets, go to work, spend time with family. Yet something feels different. A quiet sense that the environment itself is shifting in subtle ways, inviting attention. This is where reflection begins. In the Bible, there are passages that speak not only about dramatic events, but about how people respond when the world around them feels uncertain. In Book of Isaiah 24:19, it says, "The earth is broken up, the earth is split asunder, the earth is violently shaken. And in Book of Hebrews 12:27, we read, "What cannot be shaken may remain." These verses are not always understood in the same way. Some see them as symbolic, others as literal, and many simply as reminders that change has always been part of human history. And that meaning is often found not in the event itself, but in how people choose to respond. Because when the sky changes, when the ground shifts, when familiar patterns feel slightly different, it doesn't always point to fear. Sometimes it invites something else, a pause, a moment to reflect, a question about what truly matters when everything else feels uncertain. So perhaps the deeper connection is not just about signs or patterns, but about perspective. Because in times like these, the most important question may not be what is happening around us, but what it reveals within us. When moments like these unfold, subtle shifts in the sky, the ground, the water, and even the rhythm of daily life, they don't only raise questions about the world around us. More deeply, they invite reflection about the way we live within it. Because the greatest impact of such events is not always physical, it is personal. People continue their routines, walking familiar streets, speaking with loved ones, planning for tomorrow. Yet something feels different. A quiet awareness begins to grow. Not fear,